Hey, hello everybody, this is NCSO7 here doing another review video. Today I'm going to be reviewing Persona 1. I know in the title I put Revelations Persona, but that's what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it either Revelations Persona or Persona 1. But do note that I am specifically talking about the PSP version. I'm not talking about the PS1 version or the alleged PC version. Yeah, a lot of people don't know about that, at least hopefully. Wikipedia says it, okay? But I'm going to be talking about the PSP version. I played the PSP version, so I'm going to review it. Or I've at least played enough of the game to get an idea of the game. And if you want a too long don't watch version, the game isn't that great. But let's break it down by each category. Starting off with, of course, the presentation. Now, this was the first, some quote-unquote, game in the SMT series to basically use high school and, well, the demons and all that stuff. Now, technically there was another game before this called Shin Megami Tensei If that did use a high school setting, but Persona 1 was the first one to really get it into its own different series. Also, this was one of the first games to actually be ported over to, or well, not just ported, but localized outside Japan. Because for the longest time, Megami Tensei was pretty much Japan only, and this was one of the first games that actually released locally, like in America and stuff. With the only other one at the time being Jack Bros on the Virtual Boy, and everyone loves that game. But I got off track. In terms of the presentation, it's pretty good. It has the idea of kind of mixing high school and dungeon crawling and all that stuff, and as well as fighting demons and negotiating with demons, which I'll get more into in the gameplay segment. But honestly, in terms of the presentation, it's fine. I don't really have a big problem with it, but the graphics. Now, I don't think the graphics for the game look that bad. Whether it's the PS1 or PSP version, they both look pretty similar. They look fine. But I will say this, I think the character art could be a bit better. Now, I'm not talking about the demon designs, because I think the demon designs are actually pretty good in this game. All of them are fine, but the main characters, like the party members, they don't age that well. I don't know, there's something about their designs, like, I think it might be the whole realistic thing they have going on. Like, when you look at the Persona 3, Persona 4, and Persona 5 casts, like, they all have, like, their own distinct, like, they have their own vibe. They don't necessarily look, like, super unrealistic, but they look like a human, but they really take things a bit far with, like, standing out and stuff like that. However, in Persona 1, they don't really do that. A lot of the characters just have that odd look. Don't get me wrong, the game looks nice, and the character portraits in the game look nice, but the art in itself for the party members it's not my thing. I don't feel like it's the best art style, honestly, and thankfully they did eventually change this eventually. But honestly though, graphically the game's fine as well, except it does use a lot of 2D stuff, I will say. Now in terms of the story. Basically, the story starts off with you and your classmates playing the Persona game. Roll credits. As eventually, there's this girl that's apparently dead, but then they start getting all electrocuted and whatnot. Then they have to find this girl in this hospital, and then the hospital gets taken over by crazy zombies and demons, and then you gain your persona without any form of an awakening, and everyone else gets their persona. Yeah, and essentially the main big thing about the game is you essentially have to stop this guy who Dory or something like that, who basically just wants to control the world essentially. Basic stuff. Honestly, there isn't really much to say about the story, considering I pretty much gave up a few hours in, and I'll get to that a little later. So in terms of the story, it's fine. It's good, but it's nothing really that great. But now we get into the gameplay. Oy vey. If you wonder why a lot of people don't like Persona 1 compared to the rest of the series, well, now you might get an idea as to why that is. And I do find it kind of interesting that Persona 1, the one that started the Persona series, it didn't start SMT or Megami Tensei, but it did start Persona. Very interesting to think that this is the most hated game, or at least the most disliked out of all the games. Now, why might that be? Well, before we get to the battle system and all that stuff, let's first talk about the overall gameplay. Now, there are technically three variations of moving around the world. The first is just moving around in third person, where you move around a room or something like that, and that's kind of whatever. And then you move this dot on a map, which to get around from location to location, that's not really a big deal. But then we get to the dungeons themselves, and basically stuff like the mall and the school and all that stuff. And one of the big things and the biggest difference compared to all the other games is that this game is a first-person dungeon crawler. Now, I honestly don't have that much of an issue with this. And in fact, for moving in first person, you actually move very fast. Surprisingly, it's really fun to just run into walls. I know some people may not like it, and it definitely is a really weird thing that they only did with the first game. And didn't really do it with any of the other games. Although I haven't played Persona 2 yet, so who knows, but I don't think that one used first person. I think. I don't know. I still need to play the Persona 2 duology, but I'll get to that eventually. But I don't really care. Honestly, it's not a big deal at all, because the dungeons themselves aren't really that interesting. Now, there are very different types of dungeons within the games. In Persona 3 and Persona 4, they basically use dungeons where you have to get to the top floor in order to fight the boss. And the boss and the floors are randomly generated. So if floor 6, you go through floor 6, then you go up one floor, and then you go back to floor 6. It's completely different layout. But in Persona 5, they have palaces which are always consistent with their design. But they feel more like real place. The palaces in Persona 5 feel more like real places. Persona 1's dungeons are kind of a mix of both of them. Now, let me explain myself. The ways that the Persona 1 dungeons are similar to that of Persona 5's, the only thing I'm really saying about the dungeons is that they have consistency with the floors. Essentially, you go from floor 1 to floor 2, and then you go from floor 2 to floor 1 again. Most of the time, it's always pretty much the same thing as before. So it does have the consistency of the Persona 5 dungeons. However, the Persona 3 and Persona 4 dungeons, there's really not much to them, and they're basically just hallways that you run down. Occasionally, you can go into a room for something, but that's pretty much that. And also, I will say for the dungeon layouts, they're kind of there's not really much to it. Most of it is, in fact, almost all of it is pretty much maze-like. So pretty much just find a certain door in this maze. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Honestly, for overall gameplay, it's not that big of a deal. But of course, this isn't an RPG, so it has to have a battle system. Now, the battle system in this game is pretty different from the rest of the games. First of all, one of the first differences being the fact that it actually allows you to have 5 party members in your group instead of just 4 with some of the other games. Another difference is that when your turn starts, you actually have a few choices of what you want to do. And I'm not talking what attacks you want to use. You can choose to either attack the enemies or negotiate with the enemies. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they did do this again in Persona 2 as well as Persona 5. But I'm going to use Persona 5 for the example. There's no shadow negotiation in Persona 5. However, the way it works in Persona 5 is that you have to down the enemies and then talk to them to negotiate with them. In Persona 1, when it's your turn, you can make a choice if you want to waste your entire party's turn to negotiate with a demon to potentially get a skill card, or potentially get them as a persona, get an item, get money from them, scare them away, or get them angry so that way they can attack you more. And there's other options too. You can also fight as well. Many different ways to fight, but interestingly enough, when you choose what they're gonna attack, they don't immediately attack like in the other games. Say in Persona 4, Yukiko uses Agi. She uses it immediately when you select it. Not in this game though. You actually wait for everyone to choose what they'll do for their attack, and then everyone goes in order. Might I add the fact that the battles, because of this, battles can be very slow in this game. Yeah. Battles can be a lot slower in this game compared to that of the later games, especially Persona 5. Persona 5 battles are so fast, but here, not really. And that's fine. It's an older game in the series. That's completely fine. But I will whine about the encounter rate. Now, I don't think the battle system is honestly that bad. It is cool. And even though it is a bit different, as it actually uses more of a grid-based system, it isn't really that different from the other games. But one thing that does make this game a lot more frustrating is that damn encounter rate. Now, if you don't know, an encounter rate is all one of you. Basically, it's how many times you'll run into enemies. You can't see enemies on the overworld, so then you basically go into random battles. The problem with this is that that rate is way too high. It is way too high. You are going to be constantly, and I mean constantly, battling. And I know I said before that the battling isn't that bad, but the thing is, it gets really annoying after a while because you just want to get somewhere, but you're constantly, and I mean constantly, stopping to fight these stupid demons. Also, the experience they give you is really not that much. They do not give you much experience at all. Honestly, I wouldn't have that much of an issue with the battle system if there weren't so many goddamn battles. Final Fantasy VII did it right, where that game doesn't have that bad of an encounter rate. And even other RPGs before this didn't have this kind of problem. But this game takes the encounter rate way too far, and makes the game a lot less fun to play. And that right there, I would even say, is this game's biggest problem. But that's all I have to say on that, honestly. Gameplay-wise, it's easily the weakest out of the whole series. And honestly, the only one that I found pretty frustrating from time to time. And then in terms of controls, I don't even need to say much about that. And in terms of the content, this game is like 20 hours, and it was like $20, so I don't really care. That's how much it was on the Vita. Of course, you could also buy Persona 4 Gold, and that's actually a much, 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 much better game. Or you could just get that on Steam, your choice. So not much to say there. And for the soundtrack, I mean, technically it's interesting because the PS1 version actually has different music than the PSP version. Honestly, I don't really care. I will say that I don't really think about much of the music when it comes to Persona 1. There's some good music, like School Days and Alone Prayer, the battle theme, but there's not much there. Most of the music is very forgettable, and it's just not the best. And I'm talking about the PSP versions specifically. PS1's soundtrack is fine enough. I like the battle theme of the PS1 version of Persona 1, and that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So overall, final thoughts. Honestly, this is easily the weakest Persona game I played out of them all. There's not really much to say, honestly. Would I recommend that you play this game? No, I would not recommend it. Honestly, I feel like this game is extremely skippable. I would watch a playthrough if you want to experience this game. And if you do want to experience this game, I would say, really, it really depends on what you want to do, because the PS1 version, I'd say, is a more interesting game, because the PS1 version has all those localization things with one of the characters being changed from white to black. I'd say that the PS1 version is probably the version of the game that's the most interesting, because it's just the most weird thing ever. I'd say check that one out. But if you want an actually good translation, then I'd say the PSP version. Though, no, both of them are really similar at the end of the day. Actually, not really. They're both pretty different in many ways, at least aesthetically. But honestly, though, even with those changes aside, I would not recommend playing this game. If you want to play this game, I'd say play a different game. It's a very skippable game. It has good ideas. I like the ideas this game brought, and I like that this game was made into such a big series. But gameplay wise, it is so monotonous and so tedious and so annoying. And I mean, I'd be forgiving about it if the game was a lot more fun, but the game is very standard at the end of the day when it comes to the RPG stuff. It's very standard. So that's why on my scale of 0 to 10, I'm giving Revelations Persona on the PSP a 5 out of 10. This game really isn't bad, but I would say this game is really not that much fun. It's a very mediocre game, honestly. That really isn't worth your time. Play the other ones, like Persona 2, even just like watching not much footage. I know Persona 2 is a much better game, both versions, but I'll have to check that out soon. But anyways, that was my review. What did you guys think of it? Did you guys agree with it? Probably not. Actually, probably, considering a lot of people don't like Persona 1. But who knows? Maybe you did enjoy Persona 1. Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, and if this is your first time coming across my channel, then make sure to hit the like button to subscribe, because I told you to. Seriously though, please do. It'd be really appreciated. But anyways, that's it. I'm done rambling. I will see you all next time. Peace out.
It's showtime! Did you enjoy the show? Well, time for the highlight.